Like, what are some examples of things that are going on using blockchain or recording to a blockchain that are affecting what is happening in education?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about it, like as a rule of thumb, like blockchain is really like getting rid of the middleman. But like in education, where do you see a lot of those middlemen, right? I mean, like Casey was talking about, it's like one example of when you don't need anymore to rely on like a central authority to verify the authenticity of your certificate or your diploma. But also, if you think about it, like no, one of the middlemen potentially can be like teachers. A teacher like is a middleman at the end of the day, where imagine if you can combine like AI and blockchain and now like create a system where you are getting rewarded with tokens for your progress and your success through your educational system, where like the content at the end of the day, a teacher is delivering educational content, but now with AI and blockchain you wouldn't need necessarily like the use of a teacher to deliver that content. I mean, until 6 years old or 8 years old, it's really important to have like caregivers. But then like past the teenage years and all of that, like it's mainly like learning skills or content, and for that you don't need really a teacher. So that's a way like, but it could get rid of a lot of teachers in many cases.
So J-Lo starts and goes for the jugular and says, let's get rid of teachers. So. Sorry, go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, I think on that side, it's blockchain is so new and the applications are so limited. The most popular blockchain tool right now is trading CryptoKitties. And all jokes aside, I think the team behind it are incredibly smart, and it's actually a great way to bring new people to blockchain. But the use cases for blockchain are just a lot of hypothetical, a lot of really big ideas, and I think we're seeing that in the education space. Block certs, they were the ones from MIT, and they're putting MIT degrees on the blockchain, and that's actually, they've done it, and they spun out a company called Learning Machine, who's gone out and raised a fair amount of money. They didn't do an ICO, and I think it's been, that's like a good example. We were in a blockchain conference in New Delhi, and they had a bunch of ministers there, and one of the ministers in a private conversation with us said, how am I going to make money from this? That was his concern from the blockchain conference, because blockchain, as you said, there's no middleman, and that's a great thing, is that he won't be able to make more money, and I think hopefully we can see those intersections in education. Maybe they're more relevant in places in developing nations, maybe not as relevant here in the US.
So maybe talk a little more, Kathryn, if you want to take this up, if you want, or if you want to take it to a different direction. That block certs, what's the significance of that, of putting a transcript that was awarded by some other institution and putting that on a blockchain? How is that, that is a use of blockchain, but what's kind of the fallout of that, or what's the significance of doing something like that?
Well, I think going into just the basic framework, what if you have something which is decentralized versus centralized? Now, for example, I have a degree from high school, I have 2 college degrees, I have some pieces of paper at home, but if I needed to do any additional work on it, well, I'd have to call up or write to or do something, go to UC Davis, and they're going to get the information to me, and then I can show that to people, and it's easy for me to do. However, for a lot of people, for example, you look at refugees. If you are moving from one place to another place and you don't have time, or your papers are taken away from you, you don't have an easy ability to be able to go back to an institution. Perhaps that institution doesn't exist anymore. Then having a decentralized system, having something which is similar to being up in the cloud, something which is not controlled by any one institution or any one group, then I have the ability to go and retrieve that information and to be able to show it and prove it to other people without relying on a central authority. And with blockchain, that needing to get away from having a central authority, again, if you're in a high-income or medium-income country, your central authorities tend to work reasonably well, and you don't necessarily need to have alternatives to them. I mean, you can get efficiencies, you get marginal improvements, but if you're in a low-income nation, if you are in a place where you've got a failed state, then the central authority is broken, and if and only if you have decentralized possibilities, are you going to be able to go and get that information. And so again, so it's taking apart the, okay, well, how are we doing it today, and start saying, okay, if we can split up the how versus the why, blockchain is giving us a whole new toolkit for how we do it. The why might remain the same, but the how we do it can change immensely. And again, things can be a luxury, you know, for me as a middle-class person in a high-income nation. But what I love about using these new technologies for the Sustainable Development Goals is start saying, well, what are the ways in which things are fundamentally broken? And these are new tools that allow us to route around missing authorities, missing places, missing tools.
Yeah, like just to build on that point, it's a really great point, because at the end of the day, the concept of having a certificate or a diploma on the blockchain or a decentralized ledger is pretty simple, but the use case is huge, because I'm from Belgium, and when I came here, to study my master's, they were asking me all my certificates from my high school, and my undergrad in Belgium. But when you come here, and then they ask you all those papers, but you don't even have access to it because you are 12 years old, you were 18 years old, and it was like so many years ago, and that makes the whole process really complex and complicated. But then now imagine if all the schools in the world will emit the certificate on the blockchain, just like the medical records when you travel abroad and you get injured, but you go abroad and you can just pull out from this big database all the certificates, and in one click you can just send all your certificate instead of scanning it, asking it to your old school and all of that. So that's one good use case for me, I think.
Well, let's jump into another big question, and we've already talked about this, and I love that you brought up that a lot of some of the applications may not change things that much for someone, a middle-class, upper-class person living in a wealthy country, but this has enormous implications for people who don't have that kind of infrastructure. So with that in mind, and also just having in mind what one of the key aspects of blockchain is taking the middleman out, and especially taking the middle institution out. How are today's educational institutions vulnerable to major disruptions? And maybe if that's too broad a question, maybe we can say, what is education? What is education supposed to do? What are these institutions supposed to have done? How have they succeeded? How have they failed?
Well, I think they're doing a great job for what they have so far. They didn't really fail. We've been evolving and improving over the last centuries. Let's not kind of spit in the soup, as we say in French. So no, I think now blockchain offer enormous opportunities for more inclusive opportunities and equal opportunities for everybody around the world. Because again, so I work in Zimbabwe and South Africa, and one of the reasons why we build mobile technology is to scale it early childhood education, is because if we want to educate every African kids on their continent before 2050, there is not enough teachers to actually educate all of them. So, and that's a fact, that's a statistics, because there's more than 100 million kids from 0 to 6 who don't have access to education today. So now, the use of mobile technology to scale quality education with caregivers was an option, but then now with blockchain and AI, actually, you could actually just scale the delivery of content. You still need caregivers, especially for the early years, but it would just broaden the access. And then I think they will be disrupted if they don't adapt. But if they use it for the purpose again of the certificate, for example, they can just improve by integrating it. Yeah.
I disagree, but I think that education, it's almost a crime what's happening. I mean, our kids that are at schools out on here in San Francisco are being taught the same way their grandparents were taught almost 50, 75 years ago. There's been very few fundamental changes in the way that we teach children. You have one teacher, 30 kids sitting in chairs, and they're learning the way that the teacher controls the classroom. Personal learning has been starting to take more traction here in the US, but it's pathetic. I mean, I think if you look at what's happening outside the world, the classroom is accelerating so fast. automation, AI, all these blockchain, all these things are happening right now, and they're not being taught in classrooms. The prediction is in the next 10 to 15 years, 30 to 40% of all jobs in America will be automated. Where are these workers going to go? And how are this new generation coming? How are they going to be educated to take on this new world? It's happening so fast, and we're all so focused on a new tweet coming out from a, I'm not going to say, but I mean the media and everyone's so focused on something that is happening so quickly and blaming it on immigrants, which unfortunately isn't true. It's technology is taking over these jobs. The U.S. is actually decreasing its rate of life expectancy because people are losing jobs too early in construction and whatnot. And so I just see this all happening, and it's like snowballing effect, and I think it's totally a crime what's happening right now.
So, and part of that is our institutions aren't addressing the workforce needs. They're not really in touch with the world today. Is that what you're saying? Something like that?
I think the workforce needs adult education is not my forte, so I'm not going to get into it. But there is a huge problem with what are we going to do with truck drivers? You're all in this room. You understand what's going to happen to truck drivers in the next 10, 15 years. This is the largest group of men who are the average age, I believe, is 49. What are they going to do? So how are we going to reteach them? Maybe blockchain is the answer. I don't know, but there's got to be a way that we can reteach and resupply these people, or is this going to be an epidemic? It's going to continue. Sorry, bleak picture.
I mean, I just, you need to talk, but like, all I want to say is that, I mean, what you are saying that it's a crime, I think, like, what you are explaining is like the consequence of a systemic like issue that we are facing. And it's not just about education, right? It's just like the whole world is changing, and it's not only about that. So like saying that like the educational system in the US is a crime, or like so many people don't even have access to education in many places around the world, I think it's a crime to say that.
I agree very much about the importance of remedial education. I mean, if you think, for example, about the Sustainable Development Goals and the older ones, Millennium Development Goals, about getting universal elementary and high school education. So there's a lot of countries which only reached that in the past 15 years. But then if you do the math, that means that there's 2, 3, 4 generations of adults who did not get that. They need remedial education. And that is on top of, all of the reskilling that needs to happen if the potential for massive job loss. I call that the potential for economic climate change. I mean, if it's going to happen, and we don't know yet, but it has the potential to be global, chaotic, unpredictable. If you need to do that, then you need to be able to start thinking about education and skills in a very flexible, on-demand, especially personalized. Again, for my case, I can afford to take a badly done class, because the contribution to what I know, it's a marginal contribution. If it's not quite working out, I can go to the library and look at 10 different textbooks to find something that works for me. I can afford it, but again, middle class in a rich country. If you have somebody who's dealing in a super competitive market and they only have 5 free hours that week for education, they need the best available 5 free hours. Now, is blockchain automatically the solution for this, to get those 5 really good hours? No. But blockchain enables, again, distributed systems. Distributed systems can be more flexible. They need to be able to, for example, get credentials and provable training. In my case, I can do it from one place, or I have a choice of community colleges and regular places, but maybe they need to put it together from 10 different institutions or 20 different institutions, 50 different teachers from around the world. And again, that type of dealing with complexity, in the past, that we didn't deal with that at all. We didn't have complexity. No, you went to one place and you got one degree. And now we're starting to say, well, if you're going to have something, because how else will people get education if not from a complex system of people coming together, then you need the underlying technology to be able to handle that. And the current way of thinking about it isn't quite there yet, but the people who are doing, never mind Edtech stuff, but just all the different ways of dealing with distributed systems and bringing data together from different systems, blockchain has so far been showing itself to be reasonably up for the task. And so I would say that blockchain, by definition, will probably be, or maybe it's grandchild or great-grandchild, right? You know, purpose of version 1 of anything is to inspire other people to do it better. That will be the technology which is sitting in the background of this distributed, chaotic, you know, they talk about microdegrees and nanodegrees, right? I mean, we need to think that way, so we need to have technologies which handle that.
So I just want to drill down on this a little further and to use the blockchain term consensus. We don't need to get consensus, but to try to drill down on some of the vulnerabilities. So I've heard you say things like institutions aren't flexible. They're not on demand. And then JLo's first comment about teachers don't need to be in the mix. If we know what it is you're supposed to master, there are lots of ways to master it. You don't need a person, or you don't need to go to a classroom where this is the only way you can learn it. So can we agree on some of these failings of institutions? They're too inflexible. They're not accommodating to different student needs. What else would you put on the table for maybe failures of educational institutions?
So like right now, the educational system is like top down, and I think like what we need is like a bottom up system, because each of us in the room here is different. We grew up differently with different parents, with different genes. Everything is different about us. So actually, like I had a vision like 4 or 5 years ago, where we could like create a school that would be adapted to each of us. What about a school of yourself, right? And then because now, like in the classrooms, all like the classes are being taught. You are all getting taught the same way, but you are not all the same. So like there is like this image that's circulating on social media for the last years, where you have like the giraffe, the hippopotamus, and like all those animals. And then they are all saying like, okay, climb that tree. And only like the monkey managed to climb the tree because the other people are just not equipped to do it. So I think educational system is the same, right? We need to tailor-made the educational system to each and every one of us. And that was not possible like 5 years ago. And still today, like only the technologies that are gonna make that available, like machine learning, AI, blockchain, are becoming available. But yeah, I think like customization of the educational system is key.
Now, for me, I grew up the child of a Montessori preschool teacher and a college professor of engineering, and so you know, again, 10 years of building a new type of educational place, but one that focused very much on peer-to-peer learning and being there in person. So, again, we built a system which works for some people. I mean, it's a bit like thinking about particular software programs. You know, if you think like Steve Jobs, then Keynote works really well for you. And if you don't think like him, then sometimes it doesn't fit very well at all. You know, and in the past, we just didn't have that much of a choice. We'd come up with a system which works for most kids of a particular age, and you know, you could bring in a tutor to help for somebody who needs to catch up, or maybe you have a special program for kids who are, you know, advanced beyond their same-aged peers. And it was really hard to think about doing more than that, just because there's a lot of sort of the opportunity cost of trying out these new projects could be quite high if it doesn't work out. It was hard to change. It was hard to add that in. It's the 21st century. So to be able to say, all right, if a teacher is able to work with a group of kids and that teacher has assistants to be able to help track, you know, this group of kids, and here's a group who are having problems with math and they get special help. Well, if you try to do that for every different field, any one teacher by themselves, they're not going to be able to track it. You know, one of the things that works to say, you know, either Montessori school programs or college professors is that there's a relatively low ratio of students to each teacher. But again, if you have one teacher in a classroom, you know, the teacher by themselves without any additional tools, it's hard to do that. But if you have help, if you have assistance, now in a rich school that would just be helpers, actual people there, but looking into the future, if you can have the equivalent of, you know, like AI assistants, if you can have ways of tracking, if you have ways of the student is able to do the work and the system in the background is looking at them, or if a student is working and how the teacher teaches just doesn't quite work for them, You bring in somebody from the outside. It could be distance learning. It could be a video if videos work for you. But what if videos don't work for you? And so that way of being able to be more flexible, of being able to track different components, again, blockchain is a distributed tool. It allows you to be able to think that way. Once you have that tool available to you, you can start building on top of it. So you have to work with the teachers, with the experts, with the people to be able to say, look, if you had this help, what could you do? And then we start building that.
So I hear you saying we can offer way more flexibility for how students are going to learn. We can give a lot of options. If you don't learn well with videos, well, here's an AI assistant. If you don't learn well with X, let's try Y. And I want to go back to one of Casey's comments a few minutes ago, where he said, we're not teaching the right stuff. So it wouldn't really help if we tell little Max that he needs to learn X through a video because X doesn't matter anymore, or the world has moved on from those learning objectives. How can blockchain, or how can we address the curriculum? Like, what should we be learning? Is blockchain a tool to help us get there?
I don't know. I wish I could give a great example for blockchain in that reason, but I think that
drop blockchain. Like, what's a good way to get there?
I think self-paced learning and personal learning is, and most academics are agreeing with this, that this is the potential future. And I think that a lot of good startups have made direction on this, and you're seeing a lot of directional change with here in the U.S. and abroad. That personal learning is key. All of us probably went to a school where it was, one glove fits everyone, and that's not how it works for all of us. We learn in different ways, and also we have different interests, and so those interests can drive us to learn more. But I mean, if you think about how long the internet's been around, and yet we're literally just starting to teach our kids how to code in school, and that's only a few schools. Just basic, fundamental, futuristic things, not even future things that are happening right now aren't happening in the classroom.
Let me give an example. A few years ago, I was at an education conference, and there was a panel on the future of textbooks and e-textbooks and all the different, everything about it. And I had two main things were the learnings that I got out of that. One of which is when they showed the surveys about what did college students want, the answer was in most cases they actually wanted paper books, which was an interesting, because sometimes they're like, oh, do better and better versions of these technologies, but sometimes that's not necessarily it. But at one point they were talking about it was like a three-legged stool of textbooks, because you have the professors, the people who are writing them, you have the publishers, and you have the colleges, and they were talking about this, and I was listening, and I just realized, wait a minute, what about the students? And that's the question, what about this group that you're just missing entirely in the conversation? And, I was talking with some of them afterwards, and then when you look at this issue, for example, if you want to know how well a textbook works, what you really want to be able to do, say here at a university, is to be able to see, well, how did the students do 6 months later, 1 year later? How did they review it? How well did it work? And in this case, you need to have a distributed system of information so that the students are able to, share the results, and then other people, it isn't necessarily going to be the textbook publisher. The textbook publisher probably wants to have everybody use this textbook. So it's going to be a more neutral third party who's saying, hey, this textbook worked really well for the people who are INTPs. Or, what I would love to be able to see is, all right, I'm about to learn this information. Here are 10,000 people who've already learned this information. Here's the tools that worked best for them. Oh, and of these 10,000 people, here's 1,000 of them who are much more like you than the rest of them, and here's the tools that worked for them. So again, this is a fantastic amount of information. What are the tools that we could use to be able to sift through this information and then again being able to say, here is a child or here is a 40-year-old adult, and they need to learn this information, and in the case of the adult, probably they need to learn this information effectively and quickly, and so they need that personalized learning, and it should be based on data, and it should be trustable. And right now, blockchain is a technology which allows us to have this and to have it in a decentralized way, to not have to quite worry about a centralized publisher who's only going to push one particular set of tools. Or maybe the publisher isn't like that, but how do you test it? So again, having a decentralized system allows other people to be able to come along and say, that's a great version. Let me try a different version of it. So again,
did you read our white paper? Sounds like you're. Okay.
No, well, you'll be talking about it later. I really like the stuff that you're doing. Again, it's that new way of thinking about it, saying, well, what's the problem that needs to be solved? What technologies allow us to be able to do it? So you're still using the stuff that works in the past. You're still answering the why. You're just finding a new way of doing the how. And that is with all of these new technologies, blockchain, AI, and the rest of them, that's how we should be thinking. Because again, these problems are huge. You know, there's billions of adults who need remedial education. There's billions of adults who, or, you know, the ones in, you know, Europe, the United States, other high-income nations who maybe don't realize that they need remedial education, but if we have this economic climate change, they will. So we need to have systems that scale to that.
So yeah, I mean, I just want to make a point here too. Like, I think the title of the event is like it's blockchain, education and blockchain. But then clearly, we believe here that we need to first redefine and rethink what is our educational system. Because blockchain is great, but then also it's immutable, right?